The Watergate scandal of the early 1970s directly led to a more nuanced view of the presidency and displayed to the American people and the world what happens, or should happen, when a president participates in illegal or shady behavior.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
This man is Richard Milhous Nixon, the 37th President of the United States, one of the most widely mocked yet extremely influential individuals in American political history. But what led up to this paradox? To find out, one must first examine the state of U.S. politics in the late 1960s. After John F. Kennedy's assassination in late 1963, his vice president Lyndon Baines Johnson took over as president. Johnson would carry on many of the ideals his predecessor held, most prominently in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, outlawing segregation and racial discrimination in many fields. He also passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, eliminating poll taxes as a way to make voting more accessible. With great success, he ran for re-election in 1964 with Hubert Humphrey as his running mate. Johnson secured 15 million more popular votes than his opponent, Barry Goldwater, and 90.3% of the electoral vote. While he would have technically been able to run for a second full term in 1968 under the 22nd Amendment, he decided not to due to many disheartening resignations of cabinet members near the end of 1967. With Johnson's support, his vice president Hubert Humphrey ran for president in 1968. His opponent was a former California senator, former vice president, and JFK's campaign opponent as well. His name was Richard Nixon. Born on January 9, 1913 in California, Richard Nixon grew up right alongside the Great Depression. His father, Frank, owned a combination gas station and convenience store where Richard and all four of his brothers worked. Nixon would eventually go on to fight in the Air Force and in 1946 successfully run for Congress. His political fortune continued in 1950 when he won a seat in the California Senate by a margin of over 500,000 votes. In 1952, he was selected as running mate to then-General Dwight D. Eisenhower, although the campaign was not without controversy. During it, the New York Post printed an article that alleged Nixon had taken secret bribes from various campaign donors. In a television appearance during the controversy, Nixon defended himself, claiming the donations were not intentionally secretive. This would not be the last time in Nixon's career where he'd have to rebuke shady behavior. Eisenhower and Nixon defeated their opponents by 7 million popular votes in the 1952 election, and Nixon served Eisenhower for both of his terms as president. Under Eisenhower, Nixon was a fairly middle-of-the-road vice president, but the majority of his publicity was positive during this period, further familiarizing the general public with him. Once Eisenhower's 2 terms expired, Nixon was a fairly obvious candidate for the Republican Party, so he ran for president in 1960 against a fellow former congressman and senator, John F. Kennedy. In a very close election, Kennedy triumphed over Nixon. 8 years went by, and with them came another election, this time between then Vice President Hubert Humphrey and Richard Nixon. Nixon chose Maryland Governor Spiro Agnew as his running mate, and Humphrey chose Edmund Muskie. The election was close, similar to the last with Nixon, but he secured 301 electoral votes against Humphrey's 191. For many Americans who did not support Johnson, Nixon's personality was a major selling point. Johnson, while successful in terms of political progress, was notoriously rude and crass, contrasting Nixon's extreme personal isolation and paranoia as a result of growing up poor during the Great Depression. During his first term, Nixon enjoyed a fairly successful run of political events. In 1969, he participated in a phone call with the astronauts on the Apollo 11 command module.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made.
For foreign relations, he visited both China and the Soviet Union. He also famously hosted Elvis Presley in the White House. These social and political successes led to very high opinion polls going into the 1972 election. In June of that year, it was reported that a break-in had occurred into the Democratic National Committee offices in the Watergate office building in Washington, D.C. As more and more information came out, it was revealed that the people who broke in were connected to the committee to re-elect the president, who ran Nixon's re-election campaign. Later that year, Nixon did end up getting re-elected in a major landslide, winning all states but Massachusetts, but this controversy and what would soon come to light about it would be a permanent stain on his reputation. Publicly, Nixon denied being involved in the break-in, but was forced to yield tapes of phone calls with other officials revealing Nixon was actually involved. On top of this, Nixon's vice president Spiro Agnew ended up resigning, supposedly because of accepting some shady campaign gifts. Nixon, in response, nominated Gerald Ford, the Republican House of Representatives leader, as vice president, who was confirmed on December 6, 1973. Throughout the first half of 1974, Nixon continued to employ the strategy of denying all wrongdoing. Unfortunately for him, that did not work. On July 27, 1974, the House approved 3 articles of impeachment against the president. The first of these articles accused Nixon of assisting in the actual Watergate break-in in 1972, and afterwards attempting to cover it up. The second article alleged Nixon misused his position as president by interfering with the FBI's investigation of Watergate, among other departments the president has no direct power over. The third article focused on Nixon's rejection of subpoenas passed by the House earlier that year, calling for documents and physical evidence in relation to the Watergate scandal. Once these articles passed, Nixon knew he did not have long before he would be removed from office. So, in a last-ditch effort to maintain public face, he announced his resignation from office on the evening of August 8th, less than 2 weeks after his formal impeachment.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
He made it clear that his vice president, Gerald Ford, would take over as president at noon the next day. Throughout his time in office, Nixon never officially admitted to any wrongdoing, but his guilt was retroactively confirmed when on September 8, 1974, exactly 1 month after his resignation address, Nixon was pardoned by Gerald Ford. While impeachment as a concept doesn't have much direct impact on the daily lives of American people, such a high-profile impeachment undoubtedly led to the idea of impeachment permeating more into society. In 1999, then-President Bill Clinton was impeached on 2 articles in relation to allegedly lying under oath in relation to a civil suit involving sexual harassment claims against Clinton. While the president did not end up getting removed from office, his impeachment, in a way, may have been a direct result of Nixon's. Nixon's impeachment, above all, popularized the idea of presidential impeachment. Had Nixon not been impeached, the United States would not have experienced what should happen if an unfit individual takes the office of president. Had Nixon not been impeached, would Clinton have still been impeached? Would President Donald Trump have been impeached twice in his first term? These are very interesting hypotheticals to consider. Impeachment is absolutely a necessary concept in political settings, a warranted extension of the checks and balances system of the United States government, and Nixon's high-profile impeachment importantly demonstrated to Americans at the time what should happen if a president is involved in extreme corruption.